Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. It's my first video on YouTube. As you see in thumbnail, my video is about world #1 obese country. Let's start our video.
We're about to dive into a story that is, well, it's a total paradox. How on earth did a tiny island nation, which was once one of the wealthiest places on the entire planet, become the absolute epicenter of a global health crisis? It sounds impossible, right?
Okay, quick question for you. If I asked you to name the most obese country in the world, what's the first name that pops into your head? I'm going to bet most of you are thinking the United States. And, that's a good guess, but it's not the right answer.
The actual answer is a tiny Pacific island nation called Nauru. And get this, a staggering 61% of the population there suffers from obesity. 61%. And if you expand that to include people who are overweight, the number jumps to nearly 90%. I mean, how is that even possible?
So to really wrap our heads around what happened in Nauru, we first have to get our terms straight. Let's quickly look at the numbers. What exactly is the difference between being overweight and obese? Well, that distinction really comes down to one thing, a measurement called the Body Mass Index, or BMI for short. It's basically a simple tool that helps us gauge if someone's weight is healthy in proportion to their height. And you can even calculate it yourself pretty easily. It's just a simple formula using your weight and your height. Now, is it a perfect measure? No, definitely not. But it does give us a standardized way to talk about this stuff, especially when we're looking at an entire population.
So if you look here at the chart, you can see exactly how it breaks down. Overweight is that range from 25 up to 29.9. But the really critical line is that jump to a BMI of 30 or more. That's what officially defines obesity, and that's the category that carries the most serious health risk. And we're not talking about minor risks here. This is serious stuff. We're talking about a much, much higher chance of developing type 2 diabetes, heart disease, stroke, you name it. It's a full-blown public health crisis. In fact, the American Medical Association officially recognized it as a disease back in 2013.
Okay, so now that we've got the basics down, let's get back to the story. Because here's the thing. What happened in Nauru isn't just a one-off. It's actually part of a much bigger and honestly a deeply troubling pattern across the entire region. It's a true paradise paradox.
Just look at this list. What's absolutely staggering is that the top 10 most obese nations on the entire planet are all small island countries in the Pacific. Every single one of them. That's not a coincidence, right? It tells us that something really unique and frankly devastating is happening in this one specific part of the world.
And this really brings us to the central mystery we're trying to solve here. I mean, when you picture these islands, you think of paradise, right? Fresh fish, coconuts, tropical fruits, all the healthy stuff. So how in the world did they become ground zero for the global obesity epidemic?
Well, to find the answer, we have to rewind the clock and look at Nauru's history. And it's a wild ride, a dramatic story of a resource boom that took them from unbelievable riches straight to ruin.
This timeline really lays out the whole incredible story. So British explorers first called it Pleasant Island, but pretty soon it was being exploited for these super rich phosphate reserves. Then, in 1968, Nauru gains independence, takes control of the mining, and boom, by 1975, it was the second richest country per person on the entire planet. But just a couple of decades later, the phosphate was gone and the whole economy just collapsed.
I mean, the amount of money was just insane. The government completely got rid of taxes. People were shipping in luxury sports cars to an island that has basically one main road and that you could walk across in less than an hour. It was this time of incredible, but as we'll see, totally unsustainable wealth.
And this quote just says it all. Back in 1982, someone asked the finance minister what they were going to do when the phosphate ran out. His answer, tomorrow will take care of itself. It just perfectly captures the complete and total lack of a long-term plan.
Well, tomorrow did eventually arrive, and it brought an absolute environmental and health disaster with it. The crazy irony is that the very same phosphate that made Nauru so rich is what ended up poisoning the island. And here is the absolute crucial point. Decades of strip mining for that phosphate left 90% of the island's interior a barren, jagged wasteland. It became totally uninhabitable, and most importantly, you couldn't farm on it anymore. So you can see this catastrophic chain of events starting to form. First, the mining destroys the land. Then it contaminates the groundwater and the coral reefs with toxic heavy metals. So now you can't farm and you can't safely fish. And just like that, the entire nation became 100% reliant on food that had to be imported.
And this right here, this shows the devastating results. The traditional, healthy diet of fresh fish, local fruits, coconuts, all of it was replaced by the only food they could afford to bring in from overseas: cheap, processed, high-calorie junk. We're talking canned meat, instant noodles, sugary sodas, white rice. Those became the new staples.
But here's where the story gets even bigger. This isn't just about Nauru. What happened to them is really a symptom of a much larger global system, one where basically the food waste of wealthy nations becomes the cheap, unhealthy diet of others.
Okay, get ready for this example. Turkey tails. In the United States, this part of the turkey, it's basically a fat gland, is considered a waste product. It just gets thrown out. But some companies realized they could sell it for super cheap to places like American Samoa, where it has now become a national delicacy. Now consider this. A full 75% of the calories you get from eating a turkey tail are from pure fat. It's an unbelievably unhealthy product that's basically being dumped on a vulnerable market. And the story gets worse. Back in 2007, Samoa actually tried to ban these imports, but they were forced to lift the ban as a condition for joining the World Trade Organization.
And it's the exact same story in nearby Tonga, but with something called mutton flaps. These are super fatty offcuts from lamb that, in a place like New Zealand, are often just sold as pet food. But in Tonga, they're a cheap staple for humans, and they are a major reason why the nation has a staggering 34% diabetes rate.
So when you start connecting all these dots, the common threads become crystal clear. You have a history of colonial exploitation, you have environmental destruction that makes traditional food impossible to get, and then you have a global food system that floods these now dependent markets with the cheapest, most processed foods imaginable. In a nutshell, they lost their food sovereignty, their ability to control their own food supply. And all of this leaves us with a final and pretty difficult question to chew on. When decades of exploitation and environmental destruction leave an entire country unable to feed itself, who is really responsible for what ends up on its plates?